In this video, I'm going to be going over Chapter 2, how to use Photoshop's tools. So Photoshop's tools are located right here on the left side of the panel, and there are many tools that are actually hidden underneath. If you look at this tool, for example, this is the Move tool, and you'll see there's this tiny little triangle right on the right-hand corner, lower right corner. And so if I click and hold down on here, it's going to show me what other tools are available here. We have a Move tool and an Artboard tool. You'll also see that next to the tool there's a letter, in this case V, and that's the keyboard shortcut. So as you start using some of these tools, pay attention to these shortcuts, because if you want to get fast at Photoshop, this will be one of the keys. Being able to use your one hand on your mouse or tablet and then the other hand on your keyboard to hit the different keys to move between tools will help your speed when you start editing a whole lot in Photoshop. Okay, so the first thing you should have done is download this image file from the assignment page. So this first page is, if you remember, like in Chapter 1, one of those things that you're not going to be really sure about until you are using Photoshop a lot more. This has to do with the settings, to see just the tools you actually use. So if you want to go ahead and look at where this is now, you can. But if this isn't really something that you're sure of yet, you can go ahead and come back to this page later on when you're more comfortable with Photoshop. Alright, so the first page I'm going to look at is the select square or rectangular areas of my image. Now selections are really important because selections are a way that we tell Photoshop what to do to a particular section. So let's go ahead and read. If you want to edit just a particular part of your image rather than editing the entire image, make a selection of the area where you want to work, and then any changes you make will only affect the selected area. So if you remember in Lightroom, we were playing with those sliders, and that is really to make global edits. And what I mean by global edits is doing an edit that affects the entire image. Photoshop is really great for making local edits or edits that only affect a small part of an image. So in this case, let's say I wanted to move just one of these here, one of these balloons. I can go ahead and go to this first tool they're talking about, the rectangular marquee, click and drag over an area. Now when I click and drag right now, nothing is really happening, but part of that is because we're on a background layer. We're going to get into layers a whole lot more later on, but for now I'm just going to click on that little lock there and it unlocks this layer. So now that I have my layer unlocked, I can go ahead and switch from the selection tool to the move tool. And now if I click this area, you see there's a little scissors next to it. It's going to cut this area out of the layer and I can move it over. Okay, so it's moved over. If this is looking a little glitchy here, that's because of the recording software, I believe. But if we go ahead and click, okay, you can see it's just completely removed that over. So that's something that you can do right off the bat. Let's keep on reading. So I already showed you earlier how to move that, but if I want to deselect, I can hit Command D. I can also come up to select and hit deselect, and you'll see that there is the keyboard shortcut right there as well. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Command D to deselect. Alright, let's move on to the next page. Okay, so now we're going to start going through some of the other selection tools. Go ahead and take your time, read through, and make sure you're trying every single one of these, because at the end of this chapter, you are going to open up your history panel so that I can see everything you've done. Now real quick before I speed up the video, you might be, when you open up your Photoshop, it might look something like this. And if you remember from the first chapter, there's different workspaces. I prefer using the photography workspace, especially because this is a Photoshop for photography class, basically. So let's go ahead and click to that. And when we do that, you're going to see that the Panels over here change up a bit, and we have like the familiar histogram and the adjustment panels, which we will be getting into in about a week or two. So now I'm going to go ahead and speed up the video and work through these as you should, and I'll pause again when something important comes up. Okay, so right now, I don't know if you guys had noticed, but I went to click and drag on this, and I got this pop-up window that says could not use the move tool because no layers are selected. So what that means is when we're working in Photoshop, we are always going to need to be on a specific layer we want to work on. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and I'm going to click on this layer here, and now I'm going to be able to move it. I'm going to say probably about 50% of the time when something's not working exactly how you like, it's usually because you either don't have the right layer selected, or you have a selection that you don't want, or what you do want selected isn't selected. So these basic things are really important to think about, especially when you're trying to troubleshoot why something isn't particularly working a certain way. Okay, so something that I came across right now, and this is really just because I use the pen tool for making shapes and such also, but if it's not working exactly correctly to make a selection for you, and instead it makes some kind of shape like this, that's because it's right up here in the options tool. It actually says shape. You have shape selected instead of path. So if that's the case, it probably won't be for you, but just in case, you just have to go to path in order to turn it back into a selection tool. All right, so these are just some of the selection tools. We also have a couple more that we're going to be going into later, but this is really stuff to do like finer selections, which you'll find that we'll have some reasons to do this later on. For now, just try to get comfortable or get used to playing with these a little bit. I know it's a little rough at first, but with practice you will get it. Okay, so now we're going to talk about brushes. First of all, we need to select our brush tool. The brush tool is right here. It looks like a little paintbrush. You can also hit B and it will be selected. Once you have the brush tool selected, it says in the options bar, click on the brush thumbnail, it's the second icon from the left, to open the brush picker. Then click on the gear icon in the top right corner of the picker. In the bottom half of the pop-up menu that appears, you'll see all the different collections of custom brushes you can load. So let's go ahead and do that. Here's the second icon. I'm going to click here, and we have a bunch of different brushes already loaded here. Here's the gear icon they're talking about, where you can click and look at some different brushes. You can import brushes that you download from the internet. There's all kinds of different stuff you can actually do, but we're just going to focus on what's here for now. And I see that it looks like the reset brushes has gone away. So let's see. Let's play with this a little bit. So we can make a new brush there with the plus sign. We don't want to do that. Append default brushes. Append the brush defaults to the list of brush presets. Let's click OK. It looks like all the regular ones are there. So right down here, it looks like I already have all of these. Okay, so this is an instance where things have changed since our textbook was published. So usually you would have to download all of these specifically. That's where they're talking about here with adding in new reset brushes and loading brushes and such. But it looks like they're already loaded here. So if you want, you can go ahead and choose a brush. And right now I'm on, I want to brush over something, but you can see I'm getting this no symbol. Once again, that's because we are on a layer that's not allowing us. This is the layer for the shape I accidentally made earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete that layer. Okay. And I can either brush onto this new layer by clicking on it and selecting it and brushing. I can also make a new layer by hitting the little plus sign right down here. So right now my color picked is white. I have a foreground and background color. My foreground color is white. So if I click and drag, you'll see I have a brush, and I am brushing away on this layer here. All right, so brushes aren't just for drawing around like I did here. You can also use brushes for a bunch of different tools. So we're gonna get more into these tools later, trying to ease you guys into this and not overload you. But there's other tools such as dodge and burn, clone stamp, pencil, eraser, all kinds of tools that use brushes, and you can choose different types of brushes. Such as something that's, you know, more round and not necessarily artsy. We can also change things like how hard the edge is. So this one was completely soft. This one is completely hard. We also have opacity and flow right now. So if you saw how it looks like that it's kind of opaque on some parts, that has to do with the flow. So I can change that. Now if I do that, there's not so much of that overlap happening. And there's also like smoothing type of effects on there. So there's a lot of different options. Um, like I said, I'm trying not to overload you guys now. Just play a little bit with it for now, okay? One more thing I will add is that if you're noticing, I have quite a bit of control over my brush, and part of the reason is because I do use what's called a tablet, not like a tablet like touchscreen, but it's specifically the type I use as a Wacom tablet where there's a pen, like a digital pen that I'm drawing over. So that definitely makes a difference instead of using a mouse, and you'll find that most designers will end up switching to a tablet eventually. It also helps with issues like carpal tunnel, which I do have issues with my wrist, so I definitely recommend using a tool like a tablet. All right, let's move over to the gradient. Okay, so you can make gradients using the gradient tool, G. So I'm going to click on G. Oops. I needed to be in Photoshop. Here we go, Photoshop. If you remember, if something's not working, it might be because you've clicked over here, and especially for you Mac users, everything up here switches to Chrome. Once I click over to Photoshop, I'm back in Photoshop, so that could be an issue. So now that I'm back in Photoshop, I click G, and the gradient tool comes up. Now I'm going to go ahead and say make a new layer at this point. I'm going to click on the plus sign. And now that I'm on my gradient, again, remember every time we change tools, the options up here are going to change. And right now, the gradient is based off of my foreground and background colors. This might look different for what you're working in, because I've been working in Photoshop and it's saving some of the other stuff I've done. But just like the brushes, you can come down here and pull down all kinds of different stuff happening. All kinds of different presets, I should say. So I'm going to go ahead and pick one. I'm going to pick this one here. And I'm going to click and drag. And you'll see that I now have a gradient. If I click and drag again, it'll change. It all depends on where I'm clicking, where I'm starting, and where I'm letting go. So if I do a short one here, the gradient is shorter. If I go longer, the gradient is longer. If I go from here, from the top to bottom, the pink is at the bottom to purple. If I go from the top, before I went from bottom to top, now I'm going top to bottom. Now the pink will be on the top. So this is a fun way to make different gradients. And we can really use this for all kinds of stuff in the future. For now, I'm going to go ahead and leave this layer here, which I would like you to do too, and you can move it underneath here, or if you want, you can just turn it off with the little eyeball right there. But do leave it there for when you do your screenshot that I see that you actually did try out the gradient tool. All right, the eraser tool works Works the same as the brush tool, except it takes stuff away instead, and you have to be on the layer that you want to erase on. So let's say I want to erase part of this arrow. I can click on the arrow, and because it is not rasterized, it's not going to let me do it. So if I click, it's going to ask me, this shape layer must be rasterized before proceeding. Rasterize the shape. Okay, so now I can't really change that as a shape anymore. Now it's just literally this blocks of red, but now I can click and erase areas if I want to. I very rarely use the eraser tool because there is a better way to go about this that we'll get into more when we get into working with layers more specifically. But just so you know that it's there, it is there. Yeah, so erase part of your design, whichever layer you want to be on. All right, so here is another one of those selection tools that could be really helpful. I'm going to go ahead and turn off all these layers, and all I'm doing right now is I just clicked on the first eyeball and dragged to turn off all of these. So let's say I just wanted to select all of this blue and get rid of it all to put all my balloons on like, let's say, my gradient instead. There are a couple of tools that can be really helpful for that. So with the magic wand tool, if you have areas that are pretty much the same, kind of like this blue sky, or like let's say you shot somebody on a white background, you can click once. Oh, I'm on the wrong layer. See, there we go. Command D to deselect. I'm going to click on my layer 0 here. Click once, and it pretty much got all of the blue areas. Now, it didn't pick up these areas, and just like our selection tools earlier, if you hold down Shift, you'll see a little plus sign appears next to that magic wand tool, and you can click on it again, and it picks up those other hues also. So now I can do things like, let's say, click delete, and all of that is now gone. And if I wanted to put them on here, let me hit Command Deselect to deselect. I can now take this gradient layer, click, and drag it down underneath these layers, these balloon layers, and now the balloon layers are sitting on top. So that's something with layers that you'll come to find out, is that all this is building on top of each other. This is on top of there, on top of this, on top of this. Everything is building on top. If I wanted, let's say, my name to be underneath something else, I can click and drag down, and now it's underneath all of these other layers. Okay. Let's see. The other selection tool underneath here is this quick selection tool, which can be helpful for doing smaller areas. And let me actually go make sure I'm on the right layer. Here's my balloons. And as I click, it's basically the computer is trying to guess what you're trying to select. And I can click and drag, and it does a pretty good job for the most part. Sometimes it gets a little iffy, and that's where using the lasso tools to take away areas or add areas when you're making selections is really helpful. So usually when I'm making selections, I start off with one of these overall tools, quick selection or magic wand, and then I go in with some of the other tools like the lasso. So in this case, let me go ahead and click on this lasso. And I zoomed in by doing Command +++ a bunch of times. And now I have the lasso. This is selected. If I want to add to my selection, I have to hold down that Shift. Now let me turn off some stuff here so I can see what's going on. Okay, so I hold down Shift, and now you can see there's a plus sign. So now when I drag, I can add all of this to my selection. And let's see, I need to add a little bit more right here. All right, and if I need to take some away, like let's say, let me add something really obvious like that, I can hold down the Alt or Option key, and now I have a little minus. And now I can drag around here, and it's going to take away all of that area. So I just came to this page about reset tools, and I picked the move tool. And this reminded me that there is something that changed in here not too long ago that personally drives me crazy. It might not drive you crazy because you're just starting in Photoshop, but there's this auto select. And what happens with this auto select is if you're in the move tool, instead of picking which layer you want things to move around in, it will auto select the area you have clicked on. So right now I'm on my balloons layer. If I click on the text layer, it auto selects it and moves it. Now this might be something that you really like and works well with how you work. For me, it drives me crazy. I would rather just select what I want to move. So this is totally up to you. It's just something that, sometimes causes me problems because if I have overlapping things, then and I want to move just a part of something, then I'm like, wait, no, I wanted to move this instead. Wait, no, I wanted to move this. Like, I'd rather just tell Photoshop what I want to move. So this is totally an option that's up to you. But just remember, if you're having issues with trying to select something and it's moving something you don't want to, this auto select might be the problem. Okay, so I just got to this page on undoing changes in just one part of my image with the history brush tool. I tried to use it and I got this message: cannot use the history brush because the current canvas size does not match that of the history state. So that's because I was moving this around and playing with the crop and everything, and so now basically all of this is all based off of algorithms and math in the background, and so now things aren't matching up. So in this case, I can't use it. It's okay. I will not mark you down if you did the same thing I did. Okay, so I've gotten to the end of this craziness, playing with all this different stuff. Um, your image doesn't have to look exactly like mine, but it should definitely look different than when you started off. So now to turn this in, I want you guys to open up the history panel, and at the bottom of the history panel, if you go right here to the bottom, you get this little double-edged arrow, and you can pull this down. And pull it down all the way to the bottom, and hopefully I'll be able to see most of all the stuff you did throughout this whole exercise. And you can see that it doesn't have every single step. I believe it records, I think this is about 30 steps at a time. So I'm not going to see exactly everything that you did, but I am going to get a really good idea of most of it, and I'm going to see the craziness that you did over here. So now you just need to take a screenshot, crop it down to just this area, and turn it in, and you get your points for chapter 2.